Greta Kukov, who's at the center of it, writes this very bittersweet comment after the war. She says, those of us who did fight Hitler, we did what we could, but if there'd only been another 100,000, 200,000, we could have done it. And we would have saved tens of millions of lives. And you can't fault the people who made all of those sacrifices in the effort. But that's why I'm so adamant about people getting involved now and getting involved in a practical sense, not just the street demonstrations, which are fine, but studying what needs to be done in terms of our government and how to save democracy while we still may have time.
A critical component to mind control. Being made over to be clones of the person who's at the top of the pyramid. Interested in this subject because of my own cult involvement. I was recruited in 1974 into a front group of the Moonies.
Hello, I'm Dr. Stephen Hassan with another episode of my podcast, Cult Conversations, the Influence Continuum, with me, Dr. Steve Hassan. And I'm so excited to have Ann Nelson back with me. It's been years, Ann, and I've been bugging you for months to come back on with all the stuff that's been happening. I know that you are incredibly busy. I just want to say that your book, Shadow Network, Media, Money, and the Secret Hub of the Radical Right, is one of my principal omissions when I researched the cult of Trump, because I read it right after it came out, and I was like, how could I have missed this? The Council for National Policy is so central to the understanding the cult of Trump, and they put in the first editor of the Washington Times, my former cult's newspaper, etc. So you really have been a big source for educating me about the radical right. I'll also say you are a research scholar at Columbia University School of International and Public Affairs. You're a contributor to the New Republic, the Washington Spectator, the Times Literary Supplement. And in addition to your book, The Shadow Network, which is all about the Council for National Policy, I recently read, on your suggestion, your book called Red Orchestra, the story of the Berlin Underground and the circle of friends who resisted Hitler. And honestly, I was listening to the book because I spend too much time reading and on computers, but I'm listening to the book and you're giving me all these details about these individuals. And I'm like, why did Anne tell me to listen to this? But you really crescendoed to the fact that there really was a very active resistance against Hitler by Germans. And so it's so relevant to our times. And just to state the obvious, Donald Trump has come back into power in January and has been implementing Opus Dei's Heritage Foundation Project 2025 and dismantling all the checks and balances. So you are an expert. I want you to share your opinion. Oh, and I left out that you were from Oklahoma, went to Yale, forgive me, and that you've lived in dictatorial regimes, including Cambodia, Cuba, and other Latin American countries. So you really bring an incredible perspective that I think the public needs to know more about. And with that, I thank you for coming on and sharing your expertise with us.
Well, thanks, Stephen. It's great to be back. And yeah, with my book, Red Orchestra, first of all, a lot of people think that there was no German resistance to Hitler, that everybody just fell into line. And there's so many things we have to learn from this group, both what they did well and their failures. Yep. I think one thing that they did well was create a broad coalition. Mm-hmm. So what they did was find people who opposed the Nazi regime, and some of them were monarchists, some of them were communists. They had Lutherans, Catholics, Jews, atheists, you name it. And they agreed to put their differences aside until the end of the regime, and then they could start their infighting again. But over that period, they worked together. So I think that is something that we really need to think about in this moment. I have all of these people who tell me, oh, the Democratic Party is so dysfunctional. How do you get anybody to vote for a Democrat? And I say, you don't. You get them to vote for democracy.
Right.
You don't have to vote for a Democrat if you can find somebody who upholds democracy from a different party. Good luck with that.
Right. Yeah, no, it's so important. I'll just say I've been listening to Tim Snyder, who's been saying we need coalitions, stop infighting, stop, cancel culturing people because they're not using pronouns. Like, that's ridiculous. We're in an emergency situation. We need a very broad coalition to be pro-democracy.
And not coincidentally, Tim Snyder has spent much of his career studying the dynamics of Nazi Germany. So
Yes.
when one is familiar with the playbook, having studied it for literally years,
Right.
it's very noticeable when you start seeing it be reenacted.
Yeah, that's the thing that I've learned from my studies about cults is they're very formulaic once you understand the history, and many of them morph from other cults. So if you understand the DNA of a particular strand of mind control cult, and it's interesting because when my book, The Cult of Trump, first came out, there was a lot of resistance. Like, how could I call a political leader a cult figure? And I'm like, well, I think, Mao was a cult leader, and I thought Hitler was a cult leader. So my lens is, the malignant narcissist personality profile and the control of behavior, information, thoughts, and emotions to make people dependent and obedient.
Well, as they say, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it may well be a duck.
Perfect. Exactly. So, and because we did a previous interview years ago, I don't want to assume anyone has heard that. And I'd like you to start with the Council for National Policy, because I think people need to know that history and the importance of this private organization that's been plotting for decades for what the mess is right now. And then I'd like to go back into the Red Orchestra and the resistance to Hitler and what we need to know today.
Sure. Well, my academic field has been the study of media systems. And that was my starting point in this journey. I happened to be visiting family in Oklahoma several decades ago, and in driving around town, I came across this radio station that was supposedly religious, but was just pumping out total falsehoods, and very manipulative falsehoods. And in this particular case, when John Kerry was running for president, it was saying that if he became president, traditional marriage would be delegitimized, which was ridiculous. But when you have a pastor or religious figures talking about this to a captive audience and repeat it endlessly in classic Goebbels fashion, it starts to land. And I thought, well, this is a strange thing. And I filed it away. And then years later, as I started to see some changes in the country, I went back to that and traced that radio station to what turned out to be a vast radio network of thousands of stations that were all coordinating this hyper-political messaging to try to swing votes in certain populations to the Republican Party based on utter falsehoods. And then I traced those radio companies back to the Council for National Policy, where lo and behold, I found organizations like the Heritage Foundation. I found donors like the DeVos family of Michigan. And what I
That's
learned,
Amway and multi-level marketing,
which
DeVos
also
family.
has its own cult-like characteristics.
Exactly. Well, I added that in.
And as well as individuals like Leonard Leo, with his connection to Opus Dei. So when you looked at it, you said, well, what do these people have in common? And being a traditional journalist, the word is follow the money. So that's what I did. And
Mm-hmm.
what I found was that these organizations were figuring out ways to manipulate evangelical populations who had not been voting. They were not politically engaged. And Ralph Reed,
Right.
one of the members of the Council for National Policy, said there are 18 million of them out there. And if we can harness them to our objectives, we can take over the country, not by a majority vote, but by
Right.
manipulating the irregularities of our electoral system. So what
Mm-hmm.
they did was continue to ensnare people in these media systems. And, you know, it started out with the radio, but it spread to evangelical and fundamentalist television broadcasting, the whole world of Jerry
Right.
Falwell and Pat Robertson, who was a member, and with the donor base heavily based in fossil fuel industries and other extracted
Right.
industries.
Right.
And then use that to really militarize these evangelical and fundamentalist churches and create voting
Yeah.
blocs that hadn't existed before. And you can just count the states that went from blue long ago to purple for decades and all of a sudden red, blood red,
Mm-hmm.
where no Democrat ever had a chance. And I'm talking about places like Nebraska, where I lived as a child, the Dakotas. I mean, people who'd really, you know, to use your cult analogy, been fully indoctrinated through their
Yeah.
religion. And so that is the basis of the book. And what I found that was extraordinary was the way that the Council for National Policy doesn't have any power itself. It's a convening
Mm-hmm.
organization. So it's where the
Right.
donors and strategists and the religious figures and the ground troops come together and plan their operations in a very strategic, coordinated way. The Democrats have nothing remotely similar.
Yeah, it's so, your wording is perfect because it really is a networking entity with tons of money, with the agenda of what are we going to do to stop the gay rights thing and the women's rights thing, this liberal, you know, bias. So we're going to create think tanks, we're going to hire lobbyists, and we're going to target people to convert them to our way of thinking. And so it was a long haul project over decades. This was not something that was going to happen in a year or two.
Absolutely. And, you know, my book really traces it back to the takeover of the Southern Baptist Convention that was starting in the 1960s. And it was pretty much based as a backlash against the civil rights movement in order to try to maintain segregation in Southern states. But in terms of the economics, it's very clear that this was about eliminating all kinds of social safety nets for regular Americans and channeling all of that money into the pockets of the billionaires. So what you have is a straight line from things like the Paul Weyrich Manifesto, which I write about, and it is in the documentary version of my book, Bad Faith, and the Powell Memo.
Oh, yeah, you got to talk about the documentary Bad Faith. I forgot in the introduction.
And you go from that
I'm sorry to interrupt.
to Project 2025, which is basically the architecture of the plan, and you take it from there to the big bad bill that was just passed, where they're implementing the concepts of Paul Weyrich that were outlined decades ago. And what is the effect?
Right.
A multi-trillion-dollar deficit that simultaneously takes away services to half of the population of the United States, if not more, and leaves millions of people stranded without health care, which decimates American education, all in the service of the billionaires who've managed to manipulate these evangelical populations in a shameful way.
Yes, exactly. Well said. And it to emphasize, and just to put a frame for me, I was in the room with Sun Myung Moon in 1974. This was when he hit the supporting Nixon during Watergate period, where he said we have to infiltrate the government. We're going to have volunteers in every congressman and senator's office. Democracy is evil and satanic. God wants a theocracy to rule the country. And when we take power, we'll amend the Constitution and make a capital offense if people break our rules. I was in the room in 74. So when I got deprogrammed in 76 and my brain clicked on, I was like, this is really dangerous. This is like Hitler. This could happen in the US. These are very powerful people with the national prayer breakfasts. And what I learned was Jeffrey Charlotte's The Family that recruited Democrats and Republicans. And he has a Netflix series, etc. So I've been banging the drum going, hello, I'm an educated person from a nice family, and I believe this right-wing fascist nonsense that we're going to take people's physical bodies away to send them to the spirit world where we can save them later for God. Huh? And now we're watching this takeover and this dismantling of all of our checks and balances. And people still don't get this is a psychological warfare, but strategic, by people who want more power and more money, don't want regulation, don't want checks and balances. And they've been exploiting every nook and cranny for their advantage.
Yeah. And it's economic warfare as well. And people are already getting hurt. It's going to be a deadly set of policies. And you and I have been banging this drum for years now. And there have been certain people who have bought into the media strategies that these people have played. So they disregard their own children's medical care and education. They disregard their elders' nursing homes because somehow, there's a trans kid in a track meet. Now, they've never seen that trans kid. They've never met that trans kid, but they are convinced that is the greatest danger facing them. And that's how these operations work. It's called the big lie.
And they're very expert at using words to flip meanings, a la George Orwell and double think, and the horrible bill is the BBB. I'm not even going to repeat it because I know not to repeat loaded language. But we really. But what's different for me in looking at reality in 2025 is that, unlike the Russians who grew up with czars and the Soviet Union who expect an authoritarian who's corrupt like Putin, Americans are spoiled. We're used to freedoms. We're used to, walking, feeling safe and not fearing, masked people to throw us into vans to take us to, who knows where. And so there's a lot of Americans who are very upset and coming out of the woodwork, and a lot of vets who had voted for Trump who've lost their jobs, were fired from DOJ in civil service positions, farmers who've lost subsidies because of loss of USAID. And I predict there'll be millions of people who were voting for Trump thinking he was God's choice when they lose their health care and medical care. They're going to be very upset. And then the question is, then what?
Well, I think ultimately everybody's going to lose a lot. And even in terms of the people in high finance, you've got a weak dollar. You've got an incredibly volatile stock market. And as they say, the market doesn't like uncertainty. And we don't, we wake up every day saying, what is going to happen? And every day has an answer to that question. So the one, and again, I lived through these authoritarian regimes, some of which were brutal military dictatorships. And the reason I went to look at Nazi Germany as a kind of model was because I was looking for what I'd observed in El Salvador and Guatemala, which is that when you have a brutal government that misuses its power, the population breaks down into three groups. They're the people who figure out how to achieve a benefit from the regime. And so you can look at the Republicans in Congress. And even though they tell people privately they're voting against their conscience, they know they're hurting their constituents, they fall into line out of some kind of self-interest. And that exists in every situation where you have a dictatorship. Second group are the victims. And now we have U.S. citizens who are arrested by ICE in plain clothes because their skin is brown, right? And if you want to talk about what's un-American, there you have it. If you want to talk about stripping people of their citizenship because their parents weren't citizens, that's un-American. So you have the victims who often are quite powerless to represent their interests. And then you've got everybody else. And most of everybody else is a bystander. Most of everybody else says, oh, I've got to take care of myself and my family. I'm going to sit it out and it'll work out. It'll blow over. Well, maybe it will. Maybe it won't. Maybe it'll get a lot worse. So then you have to see who's actually going to stand up to the regime and whether they will be strategic enough to take effective action. And that's where we are right now.
Right. And we were just chatting before we started recording about, I talked with a Hispanic consultant who has been appalled that the messaging from the opposition to Trump has been not understanding the mindset of Hispanic Americans. And the term, for example, progressive, is viewed by them as a dictatorship that they escaped, and that's why they came to the U.S. Or the pumped fist is the wrong message, or using Latinx is an insult to a lot of Hispanic. So she was educating me on things that I didn't understand. And where's the strategy? Where's the think tank where we can get the people who have the insight, the knowledge, and the resources to mount a real response? I haven't seen it.
You know what, Stephen, I think there are plenty of people who have a lot of answers to offer.
Okay.
Plenty of us who have been in the trenches and have listened and learned. What I find is that the doors have been closed in terms of reaching the people who need to learn. So, one thing that struck me is that, not just the Democratic Party, but also people who work with political communication will go to Hispanic audiences and push issues like trans rights. And if you're dealing with older, high propensity Mexican Catholic male voters in the Rio Grande Valley, which used to be a Democratic sweep, and talk trans rights, they don't. I mean, it is not in their world. Right. What they're worried about is border security. Yeah. And the Democrats have offered them nothing in terms of talking about border security. So, rule number one in politics is that you should listen to what people's actual concerns are and not tell them what their concerns ought to be. Right. Yeah, don't talk down to them. Listen, be active listeners and be responsive. Well, and the other part of it, Stephen, is language. And I'm getting very interested in Andy Beshear, the governor of Kentucky. He's a Democratic governor in a very red state, but he himself talks about his Christian values. But more than that, he talks about language. And I heard him refer to the idea that a lot of people will say food insecurity.
Mm-hmm.
And the average voter says, what the hell is that?
Right.
Right. And if you say, we should feed the hungry, it makes more sense.
Yeah.
Right. If you say the unhoused, that is puzzling, but people know what a homeless person is.
Right. Good
So,
point.
I think that up and down, again, not just the Democratic Party, but the entire intelligentsia, there's been this desire to prove to everyone how damn smart you are, and you lose half of the population, which, by the way, reads at a fifth grade level, which means often not reading at all.
Mm-hmm.
So what they feel is this unintelligible policy speak that's coming at them instead of addressing themselves with respect and their issues with concern.
Right. And it goes back to what, we both have been observing, which is we're messaging to ourselves when we should be messaging to everybody else in the middle and the people who, got taken by the Trump rhetoric lies machine.
Well, I would even say, drop the term messaging, because that is one way. And you don't know what people's concerns are until you listen to them and have a conversation.
Okay, I'm eager to learn. And so I forgot in the introduction to talk about the documentary Bad Faith that you were featured in. It was about the Council for National Policy also. Could you say some words? And it's on Amazon Prime. Am I remembering correctly?
It's on Amazon Prime. It's on YouTube and various other platforms.
Okay.
And I mean, as of last year, it had over 1 million views. I don't know what it is now.
Mm-hmm.
But even more interesting, I was able to travel around the country last year and speak at over 30 screenings.
Mm.
And it was a real privilege because I did get to listen a lot. And because of my own background in Oklahoma and Nebraska, I asked for the chance to speak to people in the middle of the country. So I kind of started in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and went all the way down to San Angelo, Texas, and hit Omaha and Kansas City and other places along the way. So I think that for a lot of people, Bad Faith is a film. Well, what audiences said is it connects the dots.
Mm.
I think that a lot of people look at something like Project 2025 and the Big Bad Bill, and it just seems to come out of nowhere and ambush them.
Right.
And I think both my book and the documentary Bad Faith say, okay, here's how it happened. Right. And here's why it caught us by surprise. The Council for National Policy was working in the shadows for 40 years with secret meetings, secret membership, pulling its strings. And in fact, even when my book came out in 2019, people were like, oh, I don't know, you sound like a conspiracy theorist. And that all changed on January 6th, when the people who are core members came out of the shadows and appeared, on the attack of the Capitol and various other assaults on American democracy. And some of them became, were already fairly well known. Leonard Leo, for example. Some of them have done a lot of damage, but were not so well known, like Cleta Mitchell, who is, launched this assault on the vote counting systems in different states. And again, once you coordinate the money and the actions with a highly developed sense of strategy, you can really get traction.
Yeah, it's incredibly. Highly recommend people watch it. And what I've been hoping, and I'm seeing some of it now, are Christians speaking out against the New Apostolic Reformation and all of these Christian nationalists and dominionists who want to destroy the separation of church and state and want to diminish women's rights and health care and get rid of public education so people don't learn about science. And it's vital. If we don't have an educated populace, I even heard, it may be in this latest GOP bill, but that there may be a mandatory draft for high school students.
Hmm.
Did you hear about that? There's a push to get people into the military.
I think it's going to take us a long time to figure out everything they jammed into that bill at the last minute.
Yeah, good point.
And it's interesting because again, living in Oklahoma for years as a child, I knew people. I went to high school and junior high with people who went to these churches, including the Pentecostal and New Apostolic Reformation people.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not that all of those churches have been taken over. It's that there's been this very targeted effort to Shanghai and recruit and buy off pastors and bring them into this movement. There's still churches that are Pentecostal and New Apostolic Reformation that have kept their distance from this movement. And I think that there's a lot of work to be done to join forces with those churches and those pastors who say, we just want to talk about Jesus. We're not here to talk about Trump.
Right. And quoting Jesus, my kingdom is not of this world, or render unto Caesar what's Caesar's, and other, core Jesus principles that these groups are ignoring as they're pushing.
I have met personally quite a few of these pastors. And in fact, there's even a group called the American Values Coalition that works with them and tries to help them pull their congregations away from the cult media, QAnon, etc. And these pastors, many of them have conservative values, right?
Yeah.
They just don't feel it's appropriate to use their churches for political gain.
Right.
And so I think that they really deserve support. They often feel cut off from the Republicans are attacking them and the Democrats won't talk to them. So they're left in the lurch. And I think, again, going back to the idea of the broad coalition,
right,
it's important to make the tent big enough for everyone who wants to preserve democratic values.
1,000%. And I've been trying to convey the worst thing you can do with people who are in an ideological silo is to attack the leader, the doctrine, or the policy head on, because it makes them defensive. It makes them feel like you're persecuting them and you're the enemy, instead of taking a warm, curious, and asking questions. Tell me how you make sense of this. I'd like to step into your shoes type approach.
Well, I also think that it's very important to have a conversation that establishes shared values.
Right. Common ground.
So if you talk about real aspects of life, I don't assume that they want children to die of cancer, right? I don't assume that about these people. And if you can start from there and then talk about the way policies affect the lives of people they care about, then you might be able to progress with the conversation long before you get to politics or individuals.
Yeah, I'm with you. So if you had your way, what, besides the general messaging, we have to have broad coalitions to be pro-democracy, pull the tent closer, what else are you wanting to tell people to pay attention to?
Yeah, I thought that the No Kings Day was very interesting and a positive development. I also have seen in the past that a lot of people will go to a demonstration and say one and done, right? And it becomes, a kind of social event, which is fine. But then you get to election day and it hasn't necessarily accomplished anything.
Right.
Right. So right now we have two major threats in front of us. One is that the Republicans, the MAGA Republicans, that is, have been working very hard to take over local election machinery from the bottom up and the top down both. So there's something called the precinct strategy, which both Steve Bannon and Donald Trump have praised publicly, which and ProPublica has done excellent reporting on it. And what they've done is go into the precinct level in these states and purged moderate Republicans as precinct chairmen from school boards, and then dominated the pipeline into higher office so that they can guarantee MAGA from bottom to top. And of course, now we've just seen it top down. So you have Tillis basically purged from Congress because he opposed the big bad bill. So this is a way of basically neutering the Republican Party. And this country, I can tell you, having traveled to 18 states with these screenings, this country is full of frustrated traditional Republicans who say, this is not what my party is supposed to be. Right. And they're being cowed and bullied and driven out of public life in a lot of cases. So there needs to be space for them, and there needs to be a way for people now to step into the roles of guaranteeing election security on a local level, on a precinct level. They need to be trained and volunteering and accepting positions as election workers to guarantee that this election will not be thwarted.
Right. And as you were describing the precinct level, I was remembering Frederick Clarkson's work against Project Blitz, which I believe was the plan to infiltrate local school boards and to take over at a precinct level, and to try to flip using the electoral system as well. I don't know all the details off the top of my head, but just this bottom up thing. But that speaks to organizing beyond the No King's Day and one and done. But it's like, organize locally, get to know your neighbors.
And it means also finding these positions and finding your way into these positions and starting now. Don't wait until next October. That won't work.
Right.
Start now.
Right.
And the other part of it is to recruit locally appropriate candidates to run for office. Right now, the Republicans are going to have a very hard time holding on to the House of Representatives and perhaps the Senate. And if they lose either or both, the MAGA agenda is going to be very compromised because the House of Representatives controls the purse strings, the Senate controls the appointments, and that is one way to stop a dictatorship in its track. If you can get the remaining instruments of democracy in this country to do their job. It's not too late yet if people start now. And I think that there's been a lot of, I'm in New York City, and there's been a lot of discussion about Mondani and his victory in the Democratic primary for mayor. And some people have been wringing their hands because he is from the left of the party. He's had a record of various positions and statements that are to the left of the traditional Democratic Party, and people can sort that out. What interests me is that he ran a modern campaign, and he ran and defeated the machine candidate, Andrew Cuomo, who was favored to win. And a lot of what he did replicated some of the strategies that were done by the ultra-right. So what were those? Number one, he found an unengaged voting bloc and found ways to engage it. Now, with the ultra-right, it was the evangelicals. And they had been invisible to the Democrats, and they just went after them and harnessed them to their goals. With Mondani, it was 18 to 25-year-olds. So when you look at the turnout, they had it coordinated voter registration, voter recruitment, canvassing, doing door knocking, and everything else. And it worked coherently in combination with a very sophisticated social media campaign.
Yeah, I was going to say social media was very smart.
He had 40,000 young enthusiastic volunteers door knocking. I've lived in
Yeah.
my apartment for over 40 years. This is the first time I had door knockers. So the in-person plus the social media and the coordinated voter registration. And, again, the other thing is people talk about, various policy statements he's made. Above all, he convinced these young voters and created a massive voting bloc, telling them that he was going to do something about the housing shortage, because that's what keeps them up at night. So again, that is New York City. If you're going to try to work with the farmers in eastern Nebraska, it's going to be a different candidate and a different approach, but it's going to be hyper local, and it's going to be appropriate and in person. And I learned that when I went to Omaha. So in Omaha, you had Nebraska District 2, and you also have a state that has gone more Republican increasingly over the last 20 years. So what happened was they had Dan Osborne, who was a blue-collar guy who ran as an independent. And the disaffected Republicans felt comfortable voting for him. The Democrats offered to endorse him, and he said, no, thank you. Don't endorse me. And that Dan Osborne did better than any Democratic candidate in memory. And I hope he runs again, because he's sending the right message for Nebraska.
Yeah. So I want to emphasize what you said at the beginning, that we all need to pull together to be pro-democracy and not get into these silos of inter politics within the big tent, and really keep our eye on the prize. But I want to ask you honestly, I have a fear that Donald Trump won't have free and fair elections next year. What, if anything, can we do about that?
I think the greatest danger is if it's a very close election for Congress. And so if it's very marginal, it will be easier to tilt. If it's a massive election, it will be harder to tilt. Then you'll go into areas we haven't experienced before. Will some kind of militarization be in effect, so on and so forth? I don't know. But I also don't think that we can allow the fear to govern us.
Right. We don't want to self-censor. We don't want to collaborate. We want to do active resistance.
Well,
right?
I mean, I've written two books about resistance, right? One about the Germans in Berlin, one about the French in occupied Paris. And resistance is what you do, often illegally, when all of the avenues of democracy are closed off. That is not the case yet, right? We've got elections. We've got people who hold office based on democratic elections that people can participate. Now, we have low turnout, right? So I find it a little insulting for people to talk about resistance if they can't even be bothered to go vote, right? We have a judiciary that is largely functional, not entirely, but it's not over yet. So the question is, how do we optimize our chances for the system to work?
I like it. I like the directives too, that we need to focus on what's within our power to do something about. And part of my thing is undue influence. And I've been reading books now about how the algorithms and AI using our personal data is manipulating voting habits and such. And I don't see a way to have people choosing the person they really want to represent them without educating people about how their beliefs and emotions are being manipulated by being online so many hours a day.
Yeah,
what do you think about that?
Given that my field is media systems, I've got some thoughts about that.
Please.
Because, democracy in the current Western form is relatively young in the history of the world.
Mm.
And it pretty much coincides with the birth of the newspaper, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking about basically, 200 to 300 years. And we've had a transformation. What we had, there have been various stages of more centralized control and centralized information that has often worked well. In my opinion, the Associated Press, which is a very esteemed and professional journalism organization, has served the public well. In my opinion, the three networks have served the public well and considered it part of their mandate. When you get into cable news and you get into Fox and then escalate that into the fragmentation that you get with the internet, what you had was Roger Ailes and Fox capturing space and politicizing it in a way that the Democrats didn't, right? The Democrats are like, oh, well, if you watch CNN, you'll get this kind of exercising controversy and we'll cover all sides of it. Fox was like single messaging, right? It was not professional journalism. Has never been.
Right.
And the same thing has happened online where you have coordinated messaging from the right and a kind of free-for-all everywhere else. Now, it is now a moment where everybody else is realizing the way that these algorithms have exploited the public. And people are looking for ways of reaching those audiences who live in news deserts, where Fox and Sinclair broadcasting may be the only real sources of information they're getting. And so they're getting falsehood instead of journalism. But you can use the algorithms to put actual news into those same communities using this same approach. So one organization I think is extremely interesting is called Get Real News. And it's taking professional journalism and presented by local influencers, but fact-based journalism, and getting it to people in news deserts.
Tell me about it. Get Real News. Yes. Is that a .org?
Yes, getrealnews.org. And it's new and it's it's using very sophisticated delivery systems to reach people who don't have access to real journalism. But it's presented in a very popular form, right? You don't have to have a PhD to understand what they're talking about. And it's also dealing with themes that would be of interest to these audiences. So it talks about, okay, they're cutting back the funding for the VA hospital in your community. What's going to happen to the Vietnam veterans who need to see the doctor and have to wait 2 months, right? And so these are the kinds of local but national issues that affect people where they live and are not covered enough when you have, the legacy mainstream media. It tends to be very concentrated on New York and Washington and not very attentive to people in Sioux Falls.
Right. And you mentioned Sinclair, which I included in the Cult of Trump. This is an organization that bought up all these local TV stations and media stations, and they have an agenda of what each one of these individual places is going to be centrally messaging. So it really is propaganda.
Yeah, and
in my opinion.
It's very well organized. I mean, there is a listserv that goes out to these organizations every day and tells them what the story of the day is going to be. And that's why you'll find the story of the day, even if it's, you would think it would be a minor story. And they'll inflate it, and you'll find all of these organizations, whether it's Fox and Sinclair or Breitbart or these organizations, all singing in this chorus with exactly the same words. Now, here's an example. This
Yes.
false story about Haitians eating cats and dogs, right? They pump it
Yes.
out, and it's so ubiquitous in these communities that people believe it. And the actual professional journalists are running behind having to prove a negative, saying nobody's actually found a Haitian who ate a cat, right? But by that time, the
Right.
story's moved on, and they're pumping out some other absurdity.
Yeah, and I have to admit that when Trump recently said, we're sending the Haitians back or something, I remembered that whole negative messaging thing about the Haitian community. That just seemed like. So part of what I've learned about the mind is that our consciousness is narrow. And if you want to manipulate consciousness, you redirect people to where you want them to pay attention to. And one of the major techniques Trump and his ilk have been doing is he's got a problem with Access Hollywood. Oh, Roger Stone says, let's do the WikiLeaks dump now. So the whole discussion becomes WikiLeaks and the Democratic Party, and not the fact that this guy was talking about grabbing women by the genitals and proud of it, which should have gotten him disqualified just on that alone. But it's this attention manipulation device that they're so expert at.
Absolutely. And, the other part of it is that people want the adrenaline rush. So when you're selling outrage, it lands well. If you're selling absurdity, absurd outrage is like the best, right? The Haitian ate your cat, right? That's outrageous. Too bad it isn't true, but it's outrageous and entertaining in its own perverse way anyway. So if you counter that with the school children need another $500,000 in this state spent on their outdated textbooks. Boring, right?
Right. Yeah, and it really is intentional messaging aimed at manipulating emotions. And as you say, things go viral when it's fear-oriented, hate-oriented, disgust-oriented, and not as much when there are facts that are actually.
I don't know about that. I think it depends on what the facts are and how you present them. I mean, as tragic as the big bad bill is going to be, when you look at the people who are going to get hurt, it has an opportunity to present outrage, and in some cases, absurd outrage, right? Why should a U.S. veteran who has sacrificed, years of their life and their health in the service of this country be denied medical treatment? That's outrageous. Let's find them and let them tell their story and tell where the blame lies, right?
Yep.
Do it in your community so it feels, that's the whole idea, to get real news. It's real, it's current, it's local. And the thing that people don't realize is that the way the mass media works is also a kind of distraction. Right? It's very focused on Trump. It's very focused on the personality cult, right? In his own way. But when you look at the way the mechanics of our government are set up, the hold on his power is extremely fragile. The reason we have a House of Representatives, which is doing his will, is because a total of 7,309 people in 3 districts voted the way they did. Okay?
You're not an overwhelming majority, people.
Let's think about how big a town of 7,300 is. I think we're talking about Hiawatha, Iowa, right? We're talking about Podunk. We're talking about voters who probably either voted based on misapprehensions or a bunch of other voters who didn't vote because they were overwhelmed and because the Biden-Harris campaign was a disaster in various ways. So if you think about that and the power that the people of this country would regain with the House of Representatives, whether it's independents, Democrats, anybody that stands up to MAGA, that is an achievable goal if people focus on it and get organized soon enough.
Right. And it's now,
It's
people.
now.
Don't wait. Don't wait. Organize locally. Are there any potential leaders for president that you think are good messengers that might be able to have a broad enough appeal if we can think ahead? You're smiling. Is
I'm
there
smiling
anybody?
because we've got the House and the Senate races next year, along with the state legislature. So I think a strong focus is required. And I also think about, I believe it's a Zen saying, when the student is ready, the teacher appears.
Uh-huh.
And I don't
So
think the
the right
student,
person will show up
well,
later.
when people are ready to be led, I think that there are various people in the wings. And also think about the strange way our system operates, right? Obama came out of nowhere for a lot of us, right?
Mm-hmm.
Trump came out of nowhere for a lot of us. So
Mm-hmm.
nowhere means that there's these various people who have certain qualifications, and we're not clear yet on which will be most applicable. I will say I'm impressed by Andy Beshear of Kentucky. I'm not saying he's the one, but I think he has a role to play. There are various others who will be leaders. I mean, Sheldon Whitehouse has been incredible.
I listen to him. I like how he messages.
But I don't know if he's interested in the presidency, and I'm not sure that he would, where he would fit in. But he's a leader. He is a strong, one of our strongest leaders right now, and people should, he really he projects an immense amount of both integrity and righteous indignation at the harm that's being done.
Yeah, I agree with your characterization. I like people who talk from integrity and who, say it as it is, which is that so many of these policies and decisions are just outrageous and harmful.
And I'm also going to be
real.
controversial here.
Go for it.
Maybe everyone will hate me, but I think that you also have to have someone that the American people are ready for.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not going to foist someone on them that they're not ready for. As a female, I would love to see a female president. As somebody who's always supported the civil rights movement, I support minority candidates. But from what I can see, the American people have shown that they're most comfortable with a white male. And rather than changing that preference in the next couple of years, I think it would be better to preserve the system and get to that somewhat later.
Yeah. Well, I expected something far more controversial, actually. It seems kind of conservative of you to say, let's be practical here.
In my world, conservative is controversial, but there we are.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, for me. And I'm going to add something that I think may be controversial too, just for the heck of it. And it's my podcast, but I disagree with the messaging that makes all billionaires into evil, and that we need to be against all billionaires, because the way I look at it, there are some 60 billionaires supporting Trump and some 240 billionaires who aren't supporting Trump. And I want the 240 that aren't supporting Trump to not feel like they're being demonized and they're bad people. I want them to pitch in with their resources and their networks and help us.
Absolutely. And, the reality is that Citizens United gave them undue power over the rest of us. And there's no way in hell that we're going to undo Citizens United in the near future. So we have to live with the system we have.
Yeah, unless we get a supermajority and we do term limits for the Supreme Court and we expand the Supreme Court, then we might win the Supreme Court back.
Yeah.
is my prayer is the supermajority, and
But again, as I keep telling people, all roads lead to November next year. If that
yeah,
step is accomplished, there will be hope for moving forward. And I think part of moving forward will be a real hard-eyed re-examination of the Democratic Party. Right? We
yes,
can see the damage that the Republican MAGA Party is doing. If we look hard at our history, we can see the benefits of the actual traditional Republican Party and
yeah,
what people like Eisenhower have done for the country.
mm-hmm,
And we can also see the way that certain behaviors among the Democrats and an ossified party structure and a little bit of corruption in terms of their operations has left the door open for this to happen. So the
yeah,
entire situation is ripe for reform, but reform
yeah.
will not happen unless MAGA is fully addressed next year.
Yep. And I'll circle back to, I predict there'll be millions of people exiting the bubble where they thought that Trump was God's agent and was going to make America great again. I think there'll be a lot of disillusioned people, and we want to embrace them.
Absolutely.
And make that broad coalition, pro-democracy, sustaining our lives together and finding ways to build community so people don't starve and they get health care and such. So last words are yours. Ann Nelson, author of Shadow Network, Media, Money, and the Secret Hub of the Radical Right, which was about the Council for National Policy. Your documentary that features you, Bad Faith, and your book, Red Orchestra, the story of the Berlin Underground and the circle of friends who resisted Hitler. I didn't know there was a resistance. I didn't know there were 3 million Germans fighting against Hitler. And, you were very scholarly. You talked about 300,000 people got found out and executed by Hitler. But we got rid of Hitler. That's the key.
Yeah, but the brave Germans who stood up to Hitler were aware that they couldn't have done it without the other countries' involvement.
Right.
And for me, one of the most haunting parts of that book is towards the end, where the woman, Greta Kukov, who's at the center of it, writes this very bittersweet comment after the war. And she says, those of us who did fight Hitler, we did what we could, but if there'd only been another 100,000, 200,000, we could have done it. We would have saved tens of millions of lives. Yeah. And you can't fault the people who made all of those sacrifices in the effort. But that's why I'm so adamant about people getting involved now and getting involved in a practical sense, not just the street demonstrations, which are fine, but studying what needs to be done in terms of our government and how to save democracy while we still may have time.
Yeah, and there were a lot of young people who were part of this. Like, they were young. They were putting up stickers, passing out leaflets, and passing along intelligence as they got it to whoever would listen to them.
18-year-olds and 19-year-olds who were guillotined for doing that.
Yeah.
And these were people who no longer had the opportunity to register to vote and cast a vote against Hitler. We do.
Right. Great. Thank you, Ann Nelson, for being you. And let's stay in touch as the future unrolls.
Well, thank you for your work as well, Steve.
Yeah, well, I'm a fan of your efforts, and go watch Bad Faith and tell people to watch it with you. I really think we have some really good material that just more people need to watch it and learn and get educated. And honestly, I'm grateful that I put the time in to read Red Orchestra, because the last few chapters brought it all home.
Well, and I will say
So
that
thank
there's a
you.
new edition of Red Orchestra that was just published
Uh-huh.
last year by Bloomsbury that has a new introduction that lays out the parallels in the beginning as well as in the end.
Oh, that's fantastic. I listened to the Audible. Was that on Audible or did
No,
I?
that one is not on Audible yet.
Okay.
But you can order it on the Bloomsbury website, cheaper than Amazon.
Okay. Good. Well, I love it. Thank you, Ann Nelson.
Thank you.
Take care.
You too.